Welcome back into Talking Fitchburg. I'm not in my normal chair, so I'm going to put that out there. And I'm not even in my normal position because I'm sitting next to a host who's been running her own show here on Talking Fitchburg. I'm saying that lovingly, by the way. Catherine Schneider from the Fitchburg Historical Society is here. No, she's not interviewing me. She just wanted my chair, so we got that going on. No, it's our chair. That's how we're going to play this. It's our chair. But Catherine, you've been rocking these segments for the last, a couple of years now, but why am I here? No. How you doing?
I'm well, thanks, Jeremy. It's good to be here for the first time in 2025.
Certainly is. And today you're bringing some special pieces of history here as we kind of kick off the new year, January. You're like, I wonder what the topic could be. And it's kind of, we're going to take a little journey back to the beginning of time, so to speak, with Fitchburg. I was just saying to you that I think, there's some the history has changed substantially in the last 30 years, let alone from the beginning of time. When I hear you say things like glaciers and, the first government settling in and everything else, you're sort of like, wow, Fitchburg's unique.
Yes, it is. Fitchburg is unique. And I think one of the interesting uniquenesses of Fitchburg is actually the land geography. Let's start way, way back. 15 to 18,000 years ago, the glacier came into this area and covered most of Wisconsin. However, where we live here in the Fitchburg area was the very edge of where that glacier came. And so when it melted, it left signs on the land of its presence here 15,000 years ago. So you can see there are two terminal moraines that are actually located in Fitchburg. There's the Johnstown moraine, which is in the southwest part of Fitchburg, south of M. And then the other one is Milton moraine, which runs through the center of Fitchburg. They've left glacial till and glacial debris. So you can see from the top of the ridges of those moraines pretty far distances. Some places you can see actually to Blue Mound, which is 20-mile distance. If you get on top of some of the ridges on more the eastern part of Fitchburg, you can see the beautiful view of the Capitol and the Madison landscapes. For instance, right near here in City Hall, as you're coming on Fish Hatchery Road and driving south, heading north into Madison, you come up over the top hill and you can just enjoy the skyline of Madison. So thanks to the glacier having left these terminal moraines for us. There is only one lake in Fitchburg. Do you know what it is?
Lake Barney.
Excellent, Lake Barney, which is...
Well, if we're doing quizzes, I gotta start studying right now.
So Lake Barney is not a very large lake, but it's located south of M near Oregon. So that's kind of the landscape in Fitchburg. By 1833, Fitchburg had been surveyed, and as part of the survey of the Northwest Territories. And so the townships then were divided into 36 square miles, and within each township, those 36 square miles were divided into 36 sections of a square mile each. So it's interesting how the townships were actually surveyed and then divided. We have Loren Miller was the person who surveyed Fitchburg for the federal government, and I'd like to quote what he had to say about how Fitchburg looked to him. "This is a good township of land, mostly gently rolling with a good soil, is not well watered, otherwise holds out many inducements to the farmer. It has some springs and streams on the east side. On this township we saw many deer and prairie wolves." So that's kind of a look at how that looked to a surveyor in 1833, this Fitchburg that we now know as such a populated area. Of course, the Native Americans, the Ho-Chunk tribe predominated here in this area in southern Wisconsin before the people of European descent came here, arriving to carve out their farms in Fitchburg. So the Native Americans lived in communal groups. They did agriculture, fishing, hunting. In the 1830s, unfortunately, they were forced to cede their land to the federal government, and then they were moved to reservation in Nebraska. However, they kept coming back to Wisconsin. By 1875, they could legally take up Wisconsin homesteads. The Native Americans would camp many times around where there was water to do their fishing and hunting. So places like Lake Barney and Nine Springs and Lakeview were some of the places where those gatherings would take place of Native Americans. So let's talk about the first European descent settlers to come to Wisconsin. It was called Wisconsin Fever and started in about 1835. So the land had been surveyed, of course, and it was inexpensive to come out to Wisconsin and purchase land. The Erie Canal by that time had been built, and so people could come from particularly New York through the Erie Canal and then come on the Great Lakes, and it really opened up the Great Lakes for also being able to export products to the east too, so it worked both ways. So the 1840s brought a lot of Yankee settlers into Wisconsin from New York. Because, of course, Wisconsin, if you think about it, is quite similar to New York, geography and climate. So it was familiar to those people coming from New York. So let me tell you about the first settler to come here from that Yankee background. Would you happen to know what his name is?
I may have a slight idea because I'm following along on the website, but the Vroman family was I did not know that.
Actually, if you want to know the very first...
Oh, wasn't?
Was not the Vroman family. We will come to them, but the very first was John Stoner. He came and he opened the first farm in Fitchburg, and that was in 1837. He was only the third settler to come in the county. So just think of the thousands of acres he would have had to choose from. But he chose Fitchburg, and he came to settle on South Seminole Highway, just south of Lacey Road. And this is just an example of someone writing about what his place looked like, where he lived. He went out to the farm on Monday mornings and took his rations with him for the week. So he came out just for the week to farm. Yes.
Okay.
He erected a shanty, open on three sides, covered with oak shakes, which turned most of the rain, so kept the rain out. And he had a fire in front of the ground for cooking purposes, a bundle of straw, and blankets. A few camp stools constituted the furniture in this cabin, in which he managed to keep open house. So this was where he lived, but he went back into Madison for the weekend to be with his family. So he's not considered the first permanent settler because he didn't stay on the farm full time. So you were absolutely right that the first permanent white settlers of European descent were the Vromans. And there were three men who came out from the Vroman family. It was William, George, and Joseph. And they were from New York, Dutchmen from New York, and they came in 1839. They built the first house between Madison and Monroe, right here in Fitchburg, on Seminole Highway and Vroman Road, in that intersection. And their descendants are still in Fitchburg. The Vroman family is still here. And they came to help build the state capitol, the first state capitol in Madison, before it was even, there was even much settlement in Madison. So very early on. Then the openness of the settlers coming into form farms continued, particularly picked up in the 1840s. Here's a description of by William Fox, another one of the early settlers, of things as they were in the summer of 1843. And he has this to say: "Many Eastern people came out here viewing lands. They liked the climate, soil, and general face of the country, but thought it very far to a mill or a blacksmith shop. We had no church or school and few roads, so they could not stand it." So some people didn't planned to stay after they saw things. Our nearest mills were Mr. Hickok's in Ridgway, Iowa County, Beloit, and Columbus, either one about 40 miles distant. The nearest blacksmith shop was at Madison, a long road around the head of Lake Wingra, and the smith not always in a working mood. So, in other words, they had to travel a long way to go to the mill, to be able to have a blacksmith, which were very basic. It would be like us, I think, having a gas station. You have to go very far to travel to a gas station or a general store. So there were some inconveniences coming out here very early on in those 1840s. But soon government needed to be brought into play. Dane County's population was growing quite a bit. So by 1846, the Wisconsin Territorial Legislature created a town, and it was made up of not just Fitchburg, but they put together with Oregon and then Dunn townships to form this new governmental entity. And they called it, ta-da, Rome, of all names.
It's pretty interesting that, even thinking that those three came together, but it seems so appropriate based on the time and based on, and it's interesting that in Fitchburg being the first place that somebody would come to, in Dane County, that's just hard. That's mind blowing to think of that. Of all the land, of all the places, why Fitchburg?
Yes.
It's crazy.
There's obviously a very fertile soil here, and near the potential of the state capital growing up in Madison. I think there were a lot of inducements to coming out.
They always say location, location, location.
Absolutely.
Even in the 50s and the 1800s, oh my gosh.
Even then, always. So they set up a government, and the first meeting of the government was actually in Fitchburg, which was at Quibby's Inn, location of Fish Hatchery Road and County M, that
in the
corner.
Stable?
Yes, where they had an inn and a stable. We're right there. So William Quibby welcomed people to form the government there in the inn. Imagine that, not even a formal place for the government.
So crazy.
Yeah. The next year, actually, then Fitchburg was not called Fitchburg yet. They called it Greenfield at first. That was the first name for Fitchburg. Greenfield was set apart then from Oregon and Dunn and became its own entity. And in 1847, they met again at Quibby's Inn to form a government for what would then become Fitchburg. So they had 55 electors, voters, men, because of course it's way before women even had the right to vote, came to Quibby's Inn, and they elected 14 men to begin the business of government in Fitchburg, what would become the township of Fitchburg. And interestingly enough, the expectation was that everyone would participate in government. There were so few people. If you didn't show up, your absence was probably very well noted. So everyone was expected to be there. So they voted their first officials. Their jobs were to lay out the roads. Imagine this, laying out the roads, supervising the establishment of schools, raising taxes for the purpose of supporting the schools, and then negotiating some of the disputes that would be taking place among the new residents, the farmers. So William Broman, the Broman family, first family to settle on a farm here in Fitchburg from European descent, he was one of the early officials in that first meeting. He was an early road commissioner. So he was involved in laying out some of those first roads in Fitchburg. And it was a very demanding job. And here's what he had to say. Here's his account. He said, "I spent 20 days in the service of the town, for which I brought in a bill of $7, and the town board cut me down to $4. $4 for 20 days of work. Well, the people were poor, and they said we must take turns in holding office. If the politicians of the present day were paid as liberally, they would not be as anxious for office." So,
So, government's still not easy.
government is still not easy. and paying people and financing things for government has been, even in the 1840s, was a challenge.
It's pretty crazy because that's 20 days.
20 days worth of work.
For oh man, that's crazy.
And submitting his bill for $7, and they took away almost half of that and only paid him $4. But it was also, I think, a sense of duty that you're doing this. People did not have a lot of money, and so there was an acceptance of that. So I want to talk about the territorial roads that were already there in Fitchburg when they set up the government. There were 2 of them, and they ran north and south. The first one was the road to Monroe, and that was followed along what now is Seminole Highway. So that was there. There was also a road from Madison to Janesville, and that ran along parts of what is now Highway MM. So there were the 2 territorial roads. And then of course the new government was laying out other roads, and the roads we see now in Fitchburg that have been here a long time. Of course, everything did not go peacefully all the time, and we have an account from the newspaper, the Oregon Observer, from a little later period of time, 1885, but I think it represents some of the disputes that would come up among the residents, and particularly the farmers. So this was the account. By this time, the dispute had gone on for a while and was in one of the Madison courts. So the account by William Broman goes like this. A large number of Fitchburg people were summoned to appear before the court last week as witnesses in the case of James Monk Sr. and Alfred Bitney about some pigs. The case was conducted by Olin, La Follette, and Vilas on one side, and O'Connor and Burr Jones on the other. I'm assuming those are the lawyers involved. A year later, the Observer printed the outcome of this dispute. The Sighing Pig case between James Monk Sr. and Alfred Bitney, which had been in various courts the last 2 years, was settled yesterday. Each man paid his costs, shook hands, and went home wiser men. So the dispute was settled apparently peacefully and with a shake of hands.
I can't even imagine. I can't even imagine.
Perhaps something for us to learn.
Something to dig into, huh?
Something to dig into. I want to talk a little bit about immigration into Wisconsin, which of course involved Fitchburg. Wisconsin increased in size from European immigration, so people coming from outside the United States. In the late 1840s and 50s, of course, there was a potato famine in Ireland, which brought in a lot of Irish immigrants who came for better conditions. Things were pretty desperate in Ireland. A starvation going on there. Germans coming in, of course, families. This is, I thought, interesting. Wisconsin was the first state to establish an office to advertise and encourage foreign immigration. They wanted to have people coming from overseas coming into Wisconsin. And so they hired an officer to go out east and went to New York to work with the steamship and the railroad agents. And they encouraged people to come out to buy land and join the Badger State out here. So statistically, it's interesting, I think, there were about 11,000 people in the state of Wisconsin in 1836, as Fitchburg was just opening up to settlement. And then in 1860, the population had grown to 776,000 people. So obviously that agent had done,
I was going to say,
done a good job.
They earned their $4.
Indeed, for sure. And one other little story I'd like to tell about Fitchburg frontier justice. Of course, early people coming, there was an act called the Preemption Act of 1841, and that gave recognition to squatters' rights. So on land that had been selected and improved before it was ready for public sale. So then the person who settled there, that would become their land. Well, there was local protection groups, mutual protection groups that grew out of a need for protecting those rights of those people. Fitchburg, of course, had one, a protection society. Well, of course, there were people who came in who were trying to take over that land. And here's the story. Some unfortunate speculators were hauled to Lake Barney, where a hole was chopped in the ice. And they were dunked until their notions about claim jumping were cooled. So apparently, Lake Barney served as a court of justice in a certain respect.
Only in Fitchburg.
Only in Fitchburg.
Or Rome, or Greenfield, whichever one it was at that point. But that's pretty incredible, actually.
Isn't it?
I mean, like I said, the history of Fitchburg is just fascinating to me, and I still think we're the most unique community for so many reasons. And still today, still very, you still have this very rural spot. You still have, and then you got the urban area that's just growing, rapidly. But it's interesting that there's still stuff there that was there,
Yes.
in the 1800s that
Yes.
still exists today, and it's just interesting. If people want to learn more about the history, join in on the fun, or become the next person to be interviewed on, just kidding. How can they get involved?
Fitchburg Historical Society is housed at the Fitchburg Library, so we're very convenient. We can be reached, actually probably the best way of doing it is you certainly are welcome to call the library, and they can leave a phone message for us. We have a phone there. We always get back to people who leave messages. Also, our website, fitchburghistory.org, is available for people, and our contact information is available there. We can also be contacted via email. So many ways to contact us. And also the Fitchburg Historical Society website is a great place to go to find out even more interesting stories about Fitchburg and its history, from the past, from the way past to the recent past, to us moving into the future in this beautiful place we call Fitchburg.
Yeah, I, by the way, was following along with a lot of the things that Catherine was referencing are right here on the website, which is pretty impressive. If you haven't been out there, you need to check it out. And you can also check out Catherine's interviews. All of them are out there as well. And she's done a great job of just opening up the conversations and talking about the history. It's so cool to document that stuff. I think Fact TV has a good documenting piece that's been here for a long time. But you've done some great work, and look forward to see what you got planned for 2025. I can't believe I'm number one in 2025. Even though I wasn't, it was this one right here. Appreciate all your work, Phil. You do a great job, Catherine.
Thank you, Jeremy. Thanks so much.